If I did my work, even if I never got a chance to show it, I would be carrying that spirit forward. And that gave me a purpose outside of myself. In a sense, do something important, even if I never succeeded to get a gallery or show, even at all, maybe I would be doing something important that I believed in. And I realized I wanted to make art that would make your jaw drop. I wanted to have people come around the door and look in the room and just be stunned by what they saw. And I decided I couldn't do that with painting. Somebody came up and said, "Who made this?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "A woman made this?" So it was also the size and women can do this. Women are doing this. So there was that. Somehow the money got mishandled or wasn't there. I was already working on a new piece that I was excited about. And then they said, "Well, we don't have the money. Can you just carry on by yourself?" And I said, "No, I can't do that." And they said, "Then we'll have to cancel the show." And I thought, no.
Welcome to the Installation Art Podcast, the world's #1 and only podcast about installation art and the people who work with it. In this show, you will hear about the joys and challenges of the medium and get a behind-the-scenes look at the career and process of internationally renowned guests. I am your host, Anastasia Parmson. Today's guest is a true pioneer in contemporary sculpture. The New York Times nicknamed her a heartland grandmother of installation art. Donna Dennis is a New York-based artist who, in the early 70s, was part of a small group of groundbreaking women who pushed sculpture into the realm of architecture and installation. At a time when the art world was still dominated by minimalism and male artists working with industrial materials, Donna and her contemporaries carved out entirely new territory. Donna's work is in the collections of MoMA, the Met, Brooklyn Museum, the Smithsonian, and many others. She's exhibited at the Venice Biennale, the Whitney Biennial, Tate Gallery, and so much more. She's also received many fellowships and awards. But beyond the accolades, Donna Dennis helped define what installation art could be, decades before it became the prevalent medium it is today. So it is an absolute honor to bring you our conversation with Donna Dennis. Well, thank you, Donna, again for agreeing to come and do this. Your perspective is going to be super valuable to our listeners, I'm sure. So where are you based, actually?
I'm in the Hudson Valley. My post office is Germantown because the little hamlet I live in no longer has a post office, but I actually live in a little place called Claremont. And it used to be the estate, I think as far back as the late 1600s. There's a family that settled it. They came from Scotland. They built a mansion. I'm in that property that went back. So there's a very early school, some very early things here, a lot of history. And Robert Fulton invented the steamboat, and he called it Claremont because he was married to a member of that family. The Livingstons was their name. So I'm in a place now with a lot of history. When I lived in New York City, same thing, Lower Manhattan, a lot of history.
Yeah. Okay, well, how about we start with some rapid fire, easy questions, first thing that comes to mind.
I saw you did this with Peter Coyne, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I usually do this with everyone.
I don't remember the questions you asked Peter, but Peter was also the person who connected you and me, I think. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I actually discovered your work by listening to one of her older interviews, and I was like, I better go check that out. Oh, cool. Yeah. She's a great advocate.
Yeah.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? 1 being not weird at all.
Never been asked that question before. And I'm sure in terms of my family, when I was a young adult, and I was extremely weird. but that was their standards. So
Yeah.
I'd say I'm a 5 or a 6.
Do you have a favorite quote?
Yes. Virginia Woolf's From a Room of One's Own, the last part of that where she talks about Shakespeare's sister. It means the world to me. It meant the world to me when I took courage from it, and still I tear up when I read it.
What's the quote?
I'm not gonna do well, I mean, she was a wonderful writer, but the gist of it was Shakespeare had a sister, and she also wanted to write, and she came to London also, but she got pregnant, she died in childbirth, and so she died young, and she never got to have a career that she dreamed of. But then Virginia Woolf, in her lecture at Cambridge, it is available on a video, and I also saw it live on stage in New York with, I'm not going to remember her name, wonderful actress. But so she says, but she lives on, she lives in us. And then she talks something about how we're carrying her spirit forward. And someday it will return, so to speak. So that said to me that it didn't matter because I was very strong feminist of just discovering feminism and tremendously excited about it. And it was about all I could think about for a while. But so if I did my work, even if I never got a chance to show it, I would be carrying that spirit forward. And that gave me a purpose. Feminism did too, purpose outside of myself, outside of Donna Dennis wants to be an artist, but also I could succeed in a sense, do something important, even if I never succeeded to get a gallery or show, even at all. Maybe I would be doing something important that I believed in. And that was tremendously exciting and empowering and liberating.
Yeah. I love that. That's a really wonderful sentiment, and I'll have to
I read
look it up.
Yeah, yeah. It's just the last part. The whole thing is wonderful, but that last part really pulls it together so beautifully.
What do you like to drink when working in your studio?
I shouldn't say. I work at night. Usually I became a night owl. That's why my journal book is called Writing Toward Dawn. Sometimes I would be working and I'd turn around and I'd see that the light coming through a window, the sky was lavender. And I'd realize I'd worked till dawn. So what I like to do when I was building the big constructions, and being in the country makes you change your schedule some, but I still go to the studio earlier in the evening, but I don't work until dawn. But what I like to do when I could back 20 years ago or something, I'd work in my studio. I'd work on the big installation, a lot of carpentry, table saws. I'd drink bubbly water and stuff like that. But then I would turn off all the lights and I'd get my journal out and I'd really look at the piece and I'd write stream of consciousness and I'd walk around the piece and I'd look and new ideas would come up. I'd notice things that I hadn't noticed before, and a nice glass of white wine was the way I like to end the evening.
Any specific kind of white wine?
Yeah, Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand was a favorite. And then at some point I discovered Torrontes from Argentina. And it was one night in a restaurant in New York. I said, we don't have Sauvignon Blanc, but we do have Torrontes. Would you like to try it? And I loved it. But it's hard to get in this country. And the vineyard that made the Torrontes that I really love only now sells in Europe and maybe in your country and maybe Japan.
Maybe not. In Australia, it's easy to get Australian and New Zealand wine, and everything else is a little niche.
Yeah.
But it's fine because New Zealand wine is wonderful.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Do you like to listen to anything while working?
Yeah, jazz.
Okay, let's get into the meat of the story. Donna, tell me briefly, what was it like growing up for you, and how did you come to discover art?
Well, I go way back because I guess I love to draw right from the start. and many kids are given crayons and stuff. And my family always made sure I had, and I have a sister a year younger, made sure that we had paper. My father brought back paper with discontinued address or something from his office. You flipped it over, you had a nice piece of white paper to draw on. So always did that and always had the supplies I wanted, kid supplies. But then I started to get attention for drawing, I guess first from my family, but then at school. And by the time I was 6 years old, I decided that's what I wanted to do. I was going to be an artist. I had no idea what it meant in terms of a real lifestyle, but that's what I would tell people I was going to be.
How did you know it was even a career option? Was your family artsy or?
No, not at all. But we did we went to a museum maybe once a year, something like that. But I remember my father looked at Jackson Pollock and said, I had a sister 3 years old at the time, and he said, "Your sister could do that. Your little sister could do that." So, they liked the Impressionists, but they weren't. So anyway, but there weren't art books around the house. Although there was one book that also was really important to me, which was engravings by Gustave Doré, and it was Paradise Lost. My grandparents had it. And they were very religious people. And we couldn't do anything, my sister and I, and then later I had two more sisters. But this was when my grandparents were alive and we lived with them, and my father was away in World War II. But I mean, the family did not cook on Sunday. We weren't supposed to do any kind of work on Sunday. So Sunday was really boring. We went to church, Sunday school, and then regular church, and then family worship in the evening. But there was Paradise Lost, and we weren't supposed to look at anything but Paradise Lost and National Geographic. And National Geographic was because family had missionaries. Her grandmother had cousins or spent their lives in India, something like that. So you could see what the missionaries were working on by seeing what strange people lived in different parts of the world and needed enlightenment. And then Paradise Lost and Gustave Doré, you know his work?
Yeah.
I looked at that, and I'm sure it influenced me.
So you went to study art and you studied painting. How did you then move into 3D work and installations from there?
Well, actually, I'm going to back up quickly and just say in high school, I had a wonderful art teacher who was seen artist, showed in New York City, and her husband started the art education program at the Museum of Modern Art. Her name was Mabel D'Amico, and I was really fortunate. And she was really encouraging. And she actually said to my mother, she said, "Donna has everything it takes. She can go as far as she wants." And later, when things were very discouraging and I was disheartened, and I would remember that, and it seemed like, well, she probably knew what she was talking about because she was a sophisticated artist. So I chose a college that had an art studio art program. Many didn't at that time. I started college in 1960, and many didn't have at that time. And also, actually, the one I went to, Carleton College, had a whole building. It was a small building, but it had a building for the studio, the art history and art. And that was really unique, and that kind of sold me. But I was very discouraged there for the first 3 years, and then they changed the senior project requirement, and everybody was to do a painting, and it was to be based on Shakespeare or the Bible.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and they would
That's not limiting at all.
and they would set up a still life, and they'd choose the color palette, and they'd do little corrections on your painting, and
So it was basically mostly about learning skills
yeah,
and technique.
yeah. There was one professor talked about Ben Shon's The Shape of Content. So there was one course in composition, and I came to understand that if the horizon was high, it sort of said one thing; if it was low, something else, things like that. So I had the beginnings of it. And then I went to Paris for a year and had a wonderful teacher there. And I tried to paint. I loved the idea of being an abstract painter. And I had nothing to do really that year but paint. It was great. The only year of my life like that. But I could never finish the abstract painting. I would just change this and then I'd change that. I never knew how to resolve it. And I got very frustrated. And one time I just decided I was going to do the ugliest painting I could think of. And that was a self portrait with sunglasses on and my tongue hanging out in green. And I wrote rats across the top. And then I thought, this is the best thing I've done. So I realized I needed imagery.
Yeah.
I wasn't meant to be an abstract artist, as much as I like looking at abstract paintings and it looked like so much fun to do. So that was really important. And then I came back to New York. I went to the Art Students League and continued to paint, but now I knew imagery was important to me. And I was there for a year, and then I shared a studio with Martha Diamond, a painter who's getting a lot of attention. She went to Carleton also, and we went to Paris together. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but her work is getting lots of wonderful attention. So it was the 60s, the mid to late 60s. There was pop art. And there were things like Klaus Oldenburg doing something called The Store, where you'd walk into a room and he had plaster food. And I once went to a party at his place also, in his loft, and there was a big table and it had like a real ham and then a plaster ham, and it was full of like plaster food and real food. So there was that going on, and people were saying, painting is dead, painting is dead, painting is dead, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So, and I realized I wanted to make art that would make your jaw drop. I mean, I wanted even if it was a painting or whatever I was doing, I wanted to have people come around the door and look in the room and just be stunned by what they saw. And I decided I couldn't do that with painting. And to keep myself going, I started to do collages, little collages, but then I started to do 7 by 10 canvases because I was still a painter. And I did one big painting. It was kind of an imaginary landscape, and there was a big cloud in the sky. It was sort of the canvas was divided in half. In the sky, the upper part, and the ground, the lower part. And there were some strange clouds in the sky. But on the lower part, I had a triangle, a dark triangle. And then I decided I wanted to, and I found a way to have somebody fabricate this for me. But I wanted the cloud to be able to escape out of the painting. And so this clear plastic cube I spray painted with purple, like lavender, like a cloud. And I put it out in front of the canvas. And then I put a piece of mylar, like mirror, behind it, another square on the canvas. And what I said to myself was, if the box gets nervous about being out on the floor, or the cloud gets nervous, it'll be able to go back into the painting because the mirror will be its way going back into the painting. But that was my first step out onto the floor. And actually those big 7 by 10 paintings or whatever, the big collages in a way is what they were, or assemblages. I had them sit on the floor and lean against the wall. So I was already out on the floor a little bit. And then I made this one piece with the box out on the floor. And the way I used mirrors, they were narrow strips. And I just wanted them to catch the light, but I didn't want people to be able to see themselves in it. But as you move back and forth, the light reflected out of the mirrors would change. So in a way, I was just taking these tiny little steps and I did not know where they were taking me. But, now it was something that as people moved around, it would change. And also big, 7 by 10 feet was pretty big. So, looking back now, I can see that these were all tiny steps forward.
Yeah.
And then I decided there were shaped canvases. That was one thing that was going on in painting. So after doing those big, I call them imaginary walls, I felt lost again, but I started to do collages and drawings. And one time I did this drawing that I totally loved, and it had like a ziggurat sides and a central door that stepped back. So it was a simple shape. And by now I was a feminist, so I decided these were self-portraits. So I loved the drawing. I thought I really had a very strong feeling I'd found what I'd been looking for in the previous years, and now I found it. Now it wasn't gonna be just something in a drawing, but I was gonna make it. So I made these things I called false front hotels. Actually, the first one I called a gate, and it was like going through had a mirror in the center, so, imagining you're entering another world. And I also remembered that as a kid, school trip or two to the Metropolitan Museum in New York, there was a mastaba in the Egyptian section, and they brought part of it over from Egypt. So you could actually go in a little door, but you ended up just at a blank wall. And then you'd make a left because you could do that, but that didn't take you anywhere. But if you went that distance and then took another right, then there was a false door, a narrow false door. So I was working with that too, that inspiration. And I loved that it was a door that took you to another world. And I guess I learned later 'cause I thought about taking you to an imaginary world. But for the Egyptians, that false door was an interface between the world of the living and the world of the departed. So I was working with that too. But anyway, I made these hotels with these narrow openings, and then I got a chance to show in a co-op situation. And I knew right away that I wanted to make them be a village of hotels. I was also inspired by Jane Bowles' Two Serious Ladies. She had a story about two American women, and she was eccentric, and her characters were eccentric, but it took place in Panama, and there was a description about walls that were painted green, and there were birds in bird cages hung throughout. So I was thinking about tropical too. And I had also seen Robert Wilson's, my first thing I'd ever seen of Robert Wilson's, basically stayed up all night and watched something. It was at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. I think it was Deaf Man Glance, but he had an extremely decorated stage. And then some things would happen fast and some things would happen really slowly. And he had palm trees and he had rocks and he had a little house and many other things. And that was liberating, and that was an inspiration too. So when I had a chance to show the hotels, I decided to have four of them and to make paper palm trees. And I had a friend in theater. He said, "Do you want it tropical? We'll set up the light in the back and they'll be shining toward people, but we'll angle them so it doesn't drive them crazy. But, to give it a hot tropical feeling." I had a little record player and I had a record of tropical bird calls. So I didn't know what I was, I just knew I wanted that.
Well, that was an installation.
It was an later. I did an installation, but
Was that word even in the vocabulary of the art world back then?
if it was just barely. And I'm talking 1973 was that show. I mean, I called what I was doing. If they weren't shaped canvases, as they got to be more three-dimensional, I thought they were painted wooden constructions. But in the very start, my very first show, I always wanted sound. I wanted to think about the light. I wanted people to walk among the pieces and behind and to feel like they were in a magical place, I guess. So I think the term was environmental back then.
Yeah.
I think people talked about environmental, but they weren't talking about things having to do with global warming. They were talking about installations. If there were installations at the time, there was Klaus Oldenburg in his store, but I guess he had created an environment. I think it's the way people talked about it.
Yeah. You touched on the subject of feminism briefly. I think that's a very important part of your career because you were coming of age as an artist during a time when women weren't even mentioned in art history books. And
the art history book that I had in college, Jansen's had no women. Everybody knows that now.
Yeah. And galleries were dominated by men making minimalist work. So what sustained you, or What gave you the audacity to make the work you wanted to make and make it big and loud and bold?
Maybe Virginia Woolf. But actually, even when I was at the Art Students League, I don't know, I wanted to do something that would make people get goosebumps. I just knew I wanted to do that. So I think I was always going to do that. And my things were always quiet. It's crickets. Sounds of crickets or jungle birds. Yeah, and one critic in San Francisco really criticized my cricket sounds, said they were very annoying. So I wanted to make a big impact. I just knew that. I would always say I wanted to make people's jaws drop. And when I went to the Art Students League, it was at night after my job, and I would get my painting down out of the storage and put it on an easel, and I wouldn't look at it. And I'd walk out of the room, and then I'd prepare myself a little bit, and then I'd walk in, and I wanted my painting to do something incredible for me. So I guess that's what I wanted to do to anybody who looked at the work.
Interesting way of doing it.
And as I said, I realized that I wasn't going to do it with painting. So I did start to do these big assemblage things, the 7x10 things. And yeah, and I think probably I felt like to make people's jaws drop, you had to do something that they hadn't seen before. And I did imagine with my little false front hotels, when I was drawing them, I imagined them in the woods. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could just put these hotels out in the woods, or I could put my artwork out in the woods and people would just stumble on them and they'd say, what is this? What? And they would look really closely and they'd walk around and ask themselves all kinds of questions. It wouldn't have heard of them as art. It was something else that pulled them in and, yeah, pulled them in,
Mm-hmm.
brought them to stop and look and think and notice things. Oh, and I was going to say also about size, because I think it's really relevant today, that I knew pretty early on that I needed a loft. That's what artists, the lofts were just beginning to be inhabited by artists. And
The thing you had to have as an artist?
yeah, that's, yeah. And they were just beginning. I mean, SoHo was still mostly manufacturing. Um, but I think the fact that there were these great big spaces, loft spaces that artists moved into, really made it possible for a lot of people to think really big. Minimalists, I mean, everybody to think really big. And I think it did that for me too.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say now talking about my dream of having my pieces in the woods and having people just stumble on them and having trees around, I think that idea and that dream and that image in my head led to putting my hotels among paper palm trees. And, I wanted to bring that woods with these strange things that people wouldn't think were art right away. They were just interesting things. I wanted to bring that inside.
Yeah. So, how did you manage to start showing those works?
Okay, so by 1970, I found a loft that I rented, and there were other artists in the building. And one of them said to me, there's something called, it was called 10 Downtown. So at first I was invited by this group of artists, some of them in my building, to show 10 Downtown. And that was something where we pooled our money to pay for a poster and, I don't know, reaching out to some papers or something. And people would come and visit our studios. So that's the first time I showed. So I got that experience. I set an early hotel up and I had one palm tree, but that probably helped me visualize what I wanted to do. And then the next year, some of those people in that 10 Downtown thing then started a co-op in a space in SoHo. And I got the basement, and a friend of mine got the upstairs. And that's where I did the first installation. Yeah, looking back, I call it that.
Yeah. And so you would invite people basically like a open studio.
The previous year, the 10 Downtown was open studio. This was in a co-op gallery where they I don't know if we took turns sitting or they hired somebody to sit, but it was open hours like a gallery, and it was in SoHo, which was the hot place to be. So, but I got a great review in Art News at the time. So my first review, and it said one of the wittiest and most beautiful shows of the season was Donna Dennis's Hotels. It was just a couple of lines, but I was ecstatic. And it was written by a poet, and I probably can't remember his name now, but back in those days, a lot of poets wrote reviews. And I think Art News tried to cover every show in the city. It was a much smaller art scene that everybody would get 2 or 3 lines at least.
Wow, those were the days. Now you have to look like a needle in a haystack to find anyone who writes about art.
Yeah. Well, and the poets didn't get paid very much. The one who wrote my little review was Garrett Henry. But there was in New York at the time, there was a big connection between poets and artists, at least some artists and some poets. Like Peter Shaw,
Mhm.
the critic, was a classmate of mine at Carleton College. And he came to New York first to be a poet. And he was in Paris with me and his first wife, Linda and Martha Diamond. And then when we all came back to New York, there was this kind of scene ready for me, which was the Poets Around St. Mark's Poetry Project. And the first public exposure my work ever got was doing announcements for poetry readings.
Okay. Is there a moment that you can point that was like the pivotal moment where things changed or your career took off, or was it like a gradual build-up?
It was pretty fast. Once I figured out what I wanted, I figured out what my imagery was. It was this architectural direction. And I felt so sure that was what I've been looking for. And nobody could have taken away from me or told me it wasn't good. So there was that. And then these 2 little chances to show, one year after the other year. And then there were consciousness raising groups where I met more women artists and gave me energy and resolve and a sense of purpose, as I said. And there was one artist, one painter in the group, and then there was a collector named Polly Solomon. She was well known as a collector. Andy Warhol had painted her, Roy Lichtenstein had painted her, and then she had started a little of a performance space, poetry reading, art exhibition space in SoHo. And this friend of mine, Denise Green, said, "Do you want me to get Holly to your studio?" And I said, "Sure." And so Denise got Holly to my studio, and Holly came in saying, Horace, that was her husband, "Horace and I are going to buy a country house, and we're looking for art for our country house." And afterwards, Denise said, "That's it. That's it. They're going to buy something." Because Holly said, "I want to bring Horace back." And then, it was a matter of putting up the palm trees and taking them down and putting them up again. So Horace came with Holly on the second visit, and then they didn't buy anything, and I was pretty annoyed. And then one evening, I had a figure drawing group that was meeting at my place, and I got a phone call, and this voice said, "Donna, this is Holly Solomon. I'm starting a gallery, and I want you to be in it." And that's what
Nice.
happened. And Holly, being already a famous collector and one of the earliest galleries in SoHo, got a lot of attention. She got a lot of attention right away internationally. And so that was 1975 when Holly invited me into her gallery. I didn't have a show till 76. A couple of the women noticed that there were no women scheduled for the first year, but anyway, I got scheduled for fall of 76. By 77, I was in the Whitney Biennial.
That was fast.
In 1982, I was in the Venice Biennale, and then again in 1984. So there had been previously, I got to New York in 1965. So it had felt the early years like a slog and confusing and
Mhm.
discouraging. But by 1970, things really started to. One thing, I had full-time jobs. I working in publishing and I changed to freelancing, and that gave me a little more time in the studio, and that helped a lot too. Then I lost
Mhm.
my freelancing jobs, and I was in desperate straits financially, but I had time.
Yeah, reading your journals, it sounds like you just go to the studio every day like a job and you have this very strong work ethic. I was like, does she have a day job or what?
I think that's partly why I got into working at night, because I always had a day job and
Yeah.
40-hour-a-week day job for 7 years.
Wow.
And then so I had to work at night, and yeah, and I didn't take I turned my vacation time into long weekends. So I gave myself 3-day weekends by not taking my 2-week vacation in the summer. But, no, early in those days, I was in the studio every night.
Sounds quite exhausting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, editing the journal book, I was astonished at how much I did in one day sometimes, working, coming home, doing something else, and then going to 3 parties in a row or something like that, or
Hmm.
going to a poetry reading and then going to so I was young, I had that kind of energy.
Yeah. And did you build everything yourself?
Yeah,
Do you still build stuff now?
from time to time, I've had really good assistants, and often when I was working with a deadline, I guess the way it usually would go, I would need to work for a while on a piece by myself. A lot of it is figuring out the scale, because I made those first hotels to be my height because I decided they were about me. So I have to play with the scale a lot. So they go slowly. And well, before the first Venice Biennale, Holly and Judy Thapp and I were going to be in the Venice Biennale. And we were both under the impression that it was the Venice, this was 1982, that Holly and this curator were talking about 1984. And then we all went out to
Mm.
dinner, and the way they talked, Judy and I realized, "Oh, no, this is April, and they're talking about June 1982." And I said to Holly, I can't do it. A piece takes its own time." Well, I basically said, "I can't do it. I have a job." She said, "Quit your job. I'll send you all the assistants you could use." So all of a sudden, I had 6 or 7 people working, people cutting up a piece of wood, putting it aside while they went to the bathroom, coming back, somebody taken that piece of wood and was using it for something else. I mean, it was kind of crazy and wonderful, but that was the first time that the work progressed at the same rate that my thinking did.
That's rare.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing, and that's when my work started to get really big. It doubled in size in 2 weeks in a way that I hadn't thought it was going to. I'd sit, with my glass of wine after everybody left, sit and look, write in my journal, free associate, those things. And I'd have a whole new list when everybody came in the next day. And then by the end of that day, they'd done all that, and I'd pick up something else I wanted to happen. So that was an amazing time. Because as a carpenter, I mean, I never studied sculpture. I never studied architecture. I never studied carpentry. So I was very self-taught. And, my pieces are not made in fine carpentry way. So long as it works, that's fine.
What kind of skills did you have to learn to make your first works?
Well, I had to learn how to make, um, the 7 by 10 stretchers I had made for me. Then after that, when I wanted to make the hotels, I decided to make my own, and I remember I was getting so frustrated, my friend Martha Diamond said when she heard what was driving me crazy was I couldn't get things square, and she said, "Oh, you just put it up in the corner of a door." And so, there were things like that I didn't know, and I would borrow a drill from my friend Rosemary, and I thought they cost like $200, but at one point she said, "Tommy, I think you could buy your own." And yeah, it cost $35 at the time or something. So I had a lot to learn, but I also, because of the scale I work, I can't use a bar or a knob. I can't, I have to figure out ways to make so it's very mixed media. I had to learn how to do pipe bending. I wanted to have lights come out one piece on a long tube and bend back and light the building. And I went up to Canal Street and I got plastic tubing, and then I put part of it in my oven and tried to shake it that way. Of course, it collapsed. And then I told another friend about that, and there were many artists back in those days, male artists, who were supporting themselves by fixing up lofts for people. And so he knew what to do, and he said, "I'll bring over my pipe bender." So I learned about pipe bending. So I picked up skills like, and the electrical work, but I did all that myself, but with
Amazing.
important lessons from other people.
Yeah. And are older pieces, are they still alive and around? Did you manage to make them to a sort of archival standard?
Well, I did try to make things that would last. Like with the painting, I would use masonite and I would gesso it, and then I use Liquitex pretty much. But I tried to make things that would last. And my models, I just used pebble board in the beginning, and then I decided to use, mat board that was archival to make them. And the way I envision things is usually I do a little painting or drawing first, and then I start to make models, just sort of tabletop size models. And that was something I needed to learn early on. And I
Mhm.
made, because after the hotels, then I wanted to be that real space behind that door. And I saw it as myself feeling bolder and more confident, and as a metaphor for women's voice in the world and the affairs of people expanding and being heard more. So that was one metaphor I was working with, more space. The first piece I made where I wanted it to have an inside, I did a drawing of the front, I did a drawing of each side, I did a drawing of the back, and I thought, this isn't really getting me where I need to be, and I made my first maquette. So it was something I could pick up, turn around, see how the different sides related in place.
Do you always make a maquette for every piece you
Yeah,
build? And how detailed are they? Are they basically your vision, or is it's just a 3D
just
sketch?
a 3D sketch. It's a way to get started, and
Mhm.
when I'm working on a big piece, make another maquette or two, like, halfway in, and the piece may it's just a way to get started.
You mentioned scale a couple of times. How do you figure out the scale? Is there like a specific mathematical formula you use, or
No, so the first hotel, when I decided it was my self-portrait, and to get to that idea, I had to decide that women's lives were worthy of study. So I decided the first one would be my height, which was 5 feet, 8.5 inches. And then I decided the top of the door would come to my eye level when I'm standing. And that's a scale up since it's not mathematical, it's based on my body.
okay, even for the larger pieces, you're still basing it on that?
Yeah. The ceiling in my place in the city was 12 feet tall. So I always wanted to go up as far as I could go. So sometimes on the second level, things might be shorter, so I could get a whole second floor in as much as possible. But on the first level, it would always be that same thing, here to here.
Yeah, I mean, your studio space must be massive.
Well, I had to move. I had to leave the city in 2019, and I've been an activist to keep artists in their loft rental. But finally, people in my building started to take buyouts, and I couldn't fight myself, and I couldn't blame my neighbors for taking buyouts because we were all in our 70s. Some of them were struggling on the stairs, or they wanted to live closer to their kids, and the buyouts were something you could really do something with. For the first time, we had a succession of landlords. But one thing I found out about the building was it was 75 feet wide, which is really unusual. 3 lots. And most loft buildings in New York are 25 feet wide. When I found that building and decided which floor, we built a wall. So we divided 75 feet in half. But that meant I still had a bigger space than most lofts. And then I think the building was maybe 75 feet long too. And I just made a little living space for me in the back, and it was almost all studio. So it was big. Over the
Mhm.
years, our pieces started to expand to get as big as they could get. in the available space.
Do the pieces come apart? Like, how do
Oh,
you transport
oh,
them?
yeah, they come apart. I had an elevator, it was a freight elevator, and I would always make sure any piece would fit into that freight elevator. So then piece would all come apart for being shipped, and then I'd go and put it back together again wherever it was being shown.
Would you always have to be present personally when you're installing an exhibition?
Yeah, and the lighting is really important.
Mhm.
It was all in my mind putting together. Yeah, I mean, it's as far as you can get from having an architect do a drawing and then having a building built based on the architect's drawing. Guess I still work like a painter. Like I would think, "Oh, I want some stairs over there." So I build the stairs and I think, "Maybe I don't want them that tall, or maybe I want them over here, or maybe I want flat stairs and I want another stairs." So I would proceed that way, kind of the way you do when does a painting. Try this, try that, move it around, change the color. But yeah, so it was all in my head how it went together. Sometimes I needed to do touch-ups, and the lighting really, really important to me. But over the recent years, I had an opportunity to show 3 of the early pieces at a gallery called O'Flaherty's in New York, and actually 3 pieces sold. 3 of those early pieces sold out of that show. One went to the Metropolitan Museum, and it was clear that I had to have instructions. So before the pieces went to the show, they came to my studio up here now, which is a barn-like structure, and I really do have a lot of space, 2 floors. And my assistant, Ori, we would put the pieces together, but we'd take photographs, we'd write down each step. So now there are instructions for there's a couple of pieces that still need to have that done, but that's been done for almost with it. There's also I'm not gonna be around forever, so
Do you also have instructions for the lighting and things like that, the environment
I
around it?
try to. I try to describe so that because it's always the ambient light or, like, the adjusted looking. I try to describe it in simple terms. So
Mhm. What happens to the work in between installations? Where does it live?
for many years, it's lived at self-storage units, 4 or 5 self-storage units in Cobblestone, New York, behind what used to be called Stella Motors. So just these kinds of self-storage with a roll-down garage door, no heating, no nothing.
And it's fine in there?
I wasn't sure. Some of these pieces that I showed at O'Flaherty's, I had not actually looked at closely in decades, but
Mm,
and I thought, maybe I'll just touch the wooden part and it'll crumble because the termites have been at it, but they were okay.
great.
Somebody said maybe termites don't hang out around mall buildings, but they were okay.
Yeah, we've had myself and a friend of mine, we've had our storage units flooded in the
Oh,
last year or 2. That's always fun to deal with.
read that. Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, I can't think of anything worse than having to fix an old artwork that I'm, like, finished, done, I don't wanna look at it anymore.
Yeah, and, yeah, just think about how I mean, it sounds like you were able to salvage the work.
No,
Well,
I mean, some of it is definitely damaged and has, like, moisture damage and therefore needs to essentially be restored,
mhm,
and I haven't done that. I'm looking at it, I'm like, "Do I need that piece?" I don't know.
or later,
Yeah, and of course, insurance doesn't help at all because you still have to do the work, you know?
I don't have any insurance, but I did have a piece go to a show in Texas one time, and it came back in cardboard boxes that had obviously just been thrown around and gone down chutes in an airplane, and it was in really bad shape, and it was insured by the exhibiting organization. So I did have professional restorers, and it was really interesting to watch them work.
Oh, that would be very interesting. Were you happy with the
Yeah,
result?
yeah.
Now
Hey, what
that's next level.
yeah, these restorers work for the Met. They freelance, but
Mm.
so they were the best, and they did a great job. So I did not have.
I would like
But
that.
if something happened in my storage units,
Yeah.
it would be me.
Do you include details in your work, like inside or in the center, that no one's going to see, but you know it's there?
Yeah. But I always did make, like my 2-story house, I make little vistas for, maybe talking about windows is easier. I love people looking into the piece all around. I like the idea of people who move like 1 foot at a time around a piece, having a different view each time, and things lining up or no longer lining up, or some little vista of something that they couldn't see otherwise. So, like little rewards for taking time and looking in.
I love
My
that.
2-story house, it had 6 windows in the bay. Well, it had more windows, but it has a bay window. But anyway, I had shades on the inside in some windows, so you could see light coming through from inside, but you couldn't see any details. But if you went around to another side and looked in through another window, you'd see what was in that room that was unavailable from another view. So, and I guess part of it was getting people to walk around and make little discoveries.
When people look at your work, what would you like the audience to take away from it?
Yeah, I guess maybe it's changed a little bit over time, or in the beginning, making really big things was also so exciting. I was installing at the Brooklyn Museum one time. My deep station, I guess at the time it was my biggest piece. And I was installing, it was in the lobby, so people were coming and going, and somebody came up and said, "Who made this?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "A woman made this?" So it was also the size and the just, yeah, women can do this. Women are doing this. So there was that. But also just, I don't know, a sense of mystery, a sense of awe, a sense of discovery, a sense in the beginning when my things looked, it was almost always something that looked a little decrepit. So it was also, well, I love those things myself, but it was also kind of, maybe look again, like my early Subway things seemed like they're making this. They didn't actually say this, but I imagine people saying, "You're making a sculpture about the Subway." Actually, one of my Subway pieces, somebody said to me, "I can smell the urine." And I thought that was such a great comment.
Very evocative.
Yeah. But it was partly, I found the Subway so beautiful, and the darkness and the little islands of light when you're on the express train and you're passing local stations that are like little towns that you're passing. I just found it really beautiful, and I wanted other people to see that it was beautiful. But
Mhm.
in terms of, in a more political sense, I think I could say, some sense of like, look again. You may dismiss what women do, but don't take it for granted that that's the right thing to do. Look again. And somebody once said to me, well, I'm a really big jazz fan, and it's accompanied me in the studio for decades and decades. But someone said, yeah, this was a really early Subway piece, and I had a stairway going up in the front, but that was blocked off by a yellow gate. And then I had a stairway on the same diagonal going down in the back. And that I had little circles of, I don't know, have you seen sidewalks with little circles of glass? And I had something like that with light coming up through. So it was like the front way was blocked, but the back way gave you entry. And it was an architect. He said, "Oh, that's so much like jazz in a way." But
Cool.
well, like, women and um, blacks having this wonderful art, but refused the main entry, but somehow managing to make something, not giving up, finding a way, nevertheless.
Yeah. Coming back to the audience, what level of interaction, if any, do you invite from the audience? Can people touch the work? Can they step into
No,
it?
no. And I should also say that I've always been proud and wanted to make work that could be appreciated by anybody at any level of sophistication, kids, grown-ups, sophisticated art viewers, less sophisticated. And another great compliment I got once was I had a washing machine repair person at my place, a man, and I had a couple of maquettes sitting nearby. And after a while, he just said, "I don't know why it is, but I just can't stop looking at those." And I thought, great, I love that. I'm not a fan of art theory, and I like something that can appeal to everybody, whatever level of experience they bring to looking. So, and I had some other thoughts. Can you rephrase your question here, or just again?
Um,
Oh,
we were talking about the audience interaction. Like you said, people definitely can't touch it. How do you design your work in a way to prevent people from touching or unwanted damage from the audience?
I don't really design. Well, I do design. Basically, I mean, it's okay if somebody touches something as long as it doesn't leave a mark. And I show places where they have guards and stuff. Mostly, some make my things so big, they're usually shown in museums where somebody is watching. But early on, I did realize I didn't want to, when I started to make pieces with a track that somebody could walk in, I didn't want that because it throws the whole scale off for everybody else who's looking. My work also has a sense of being in a deserted place. For that, I try to just build things and let people know you're not supposed to walk in there in the track area. But the main part of the work, I do always have platform that seems to be coming out of, which is about knee height. So visually, the work starts at about knee height.
Right. So it doesn't sit on the floor per se.
Right. It does sit on the floor, but doesn't look like it sits on the floor. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
a platform, and yeah, I guess I've been quoted as saying this. I know I've said that I don't want people to enter physically. I want them to dream their way in, imagine their way.
Hey, a quick intermission to thank everyone who has filled out our listener poll so far. Your feedback has been really helpful. And if you haven't done it yet, I would love to hear from you. It only takes a few minutes, it's anonymous, and the link is in the show notes. Or you can leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/installationartpodcast. Your input is very important and it will help shape the future of this show. Do you have any stories about work being damaged or vandalized?
Yes. um, yeah, my first, I guess it was my first temporary outdoor sculpture was in Dayton, Ohio, and I was invited to do a piece there. And the story actually has two parts to it almost. So I flew out there. They flew me out to look ahead of time so I could get an idea and they could show me some of the sites that were available. There's a program called Dayton City Beautiful. And I was born in Springfield, Ohio, and Springfield, Ohio is on the Mad River, and the Mad River goes through Dayton also. So I was kind of in home, my early life's territory. Anyway, I wanted to make a piece that acknowledged that a little bit. So I said I'd like to see sites along the Mad River. And the person running the program at the time took a long time to get me there. He basically took me to the side along the Mad River when I was on the way to the airport to fly home. So it was late afternoon, it was dark and stormy. And he parked his car, which was a 1960 Gold Cadillac, which was this is 1981, maybe. And it was already an antique. He was very proud of it. Oh, and Dayton had floods. So levees had been built. So the river was down. You sloped down to the river, and all the parks and things were on top of the levee. So he parked his car there, and then he got excited and he said, "Oh, make sure you walk down over here." And he went over with me. And by then it was pretty dark, and we turned around and his car was going down into the river. And it seemed like slow motion, the way those things do. And there was also my camera, my bag, my plane ticket was going down there. But we watched, and the car entered the river, and then the headlights stayed on, and you could see the headlights shining up. It stopped in the middle of the river, and the headlights were shining to the opposite bank. So I went home and I thought, I don't know if I should do this, but I really wanted to do it. And so I imagined that the car believed there was a tunnel under the Mad River. So I would build the entrance and the exit on the opposite bank. So it was called the Mad River Tunnel. And so I made it. It was like maybe I've been there in the spring and I was making it in the fall or maybe even the next year. But so there were volunteers to help me. Everybody was really nice. And we worked on the piece, but it started being vandalized as we worked on it. And that, I think, was because the press release, I went back to where I was staying, turned on the TV, and it said, "What is this, an outhouse?" The piece wasn't finished, but it was already being talked about on the TV news. And anyway, I finished it, and photographs were taken, and I went home, and a couple weeks later, I got a phone call, a piece had been pipe bombed. And I just thought, I mean, I realized it only takes one person. You know, if only they had invited me so I could have seen it blow up. And
Yeah.
my art dealer, Holly Solomon, said, "Oh, you know, I hope your work doesn't attract violence." Anyway, it makes quite a story.
Yeah. So how long was it supposed to be up there?
It was supposed to be, there had been other people, you know, a number of artists over a period of 3 or 4 summers had made pieces, and some of them were still there. And I thought, I'd like mine to still be there too. So I'll make it so it lasts. So I was using concrete blocks, the cement blocks for the base, and I got the Tile Council of America to donate tiles.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought, I mean, it was only a budget of $1,000 or something, but I thought, I'll try to make it permanent. Why not? But
Did you build it all there on site?
yeah, and that's where I learned another big lesson about scale, because I was really making it look a lot like the piece that I'd already made, because I only had 2 weeks and I worked much more slowly than that. And the piece indoors looked big enough. It had real presence, but outside it was so small. I thought it'd still work, but because it also, you could see neon lights on the opposite bank too. So in a sense, it took up much more space, but that was interesting.
Yeah. So how long does it take you to build something start to finish?
It varies. One piece, my Coney Night Maze, because I was teaching full time. It just took a lot of time. I think I spent 13 years on it,
13 years. Wow.
but it was big. It went through, I don't know, 9/11 happened in the middle of it. I moved downtown. I was not only teaching, I was doing permanent public art, Kennedy Airport. The offices were up in the Twin Towers. I was up in one the day before and was
Oh, really?
delivered my model and was supposed to go back for a meeting and talk about my ideas the next day, but the tower wasn't there.
Oh my God.
So
That's wild.
anyway, I did a lot of living in those 13 years and a lot of work at other things. And
Yeah. So was that piece basically sitting in your studio, like you were living with it while it's looming for over a decade? You must be very familiar with it and very sick of it.
well, when I finally, and I usually start pieces, I don't know where I'm going to show them. I just do them. And I've been fortunate, but that one could take 13 years too, because there was no museum waiting to show it. But when I did get a chance to show it at the Newberger, I'd made that platform so long before, and the platforms were kind of odd shapes. I don't know how they went together. It's been 13 years since or they've grown incrementally, but that was kind of a horrible moment of, maybe I'm not going to be able to figure this out. But it was great to show it, for sure. And then be able to have my studio free to begin to think about something else.
Yeah, I imagine. Let's talk briefly about how you approach the commercial aspect of your work, like selling or raising enough funds to make these huge projects? How do they get funded?
They, over the years, I've sold. It was a real surprise to sell those 3 early pieces out of the O'Flaherty show. I mean, I've had them since the '70s, and they've been shown quite a few places, but never sold. So I never expect to sell. But over the years, I had 10 of the smaller pieces, and they all eventually found homes. And now what's left is like the really big stuff. And I also went without. I mean, I've basically spent most of my time without gallery representation. I just make and show, but don't expect to sell. But one thing, I have always been good at getting grants. So I've had amazing number of grants over the years. I've never had a MacArthur, and I guess I never will now, but that's the really big one. But I've had some several times, and then I've always worked, at something else until now.
But have you made smaller works or maybe sketches that you sell as a more accessible thing to sell?
No, I would never make anything just to sell. I don't know. I couldn't get my heart into it. You know, I have been asked by master printers to do prints, and I've done that, and I've enjoyed that.
Like prints of photos of the installations?
No prints based on a drawing, like a lithograph or something, working with a master printer who does the edition and advises me on how to work on the stone or whatever it is. And they're usually something that came out of my drawings or watercolors, trying to envision an installation. So they come out of the first stage where I do a little painting or drawing, several of them, then I do a maquette, then I make the piece. And I used to think the maquettes would be something that people could sell, or Holly Solomon. I mean, I would show those too. I would show drawings and maquettes alternate years. I'd show a big piece and then another year with her. I left her in 1985, but she sold a few little maquettes for not very much. And I'd say, why can't you sell the maquettes? And she'd say, people love the big work. And they know they can't have it. And the maquette just doesn't do the same thing for them that the big thing did.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I would have thought that the smaller piece is at least a piece of your handiwork that they can have, even if they can't afford the large work.
Or have room for it. I understand the size is a big obstacle. But yeah, I just have not done well dealing with the commercial side. I just do the work. And well, as I said, to sell those 3 pieces out of a Flaherty's show was incredible. Fantastic.
Can you tell me about a moment when you had to make a difficult decision about your work or career, or where there was no perfect solution?
I mentioned the Venice Biennale in 1982 and thinking, no, I need a year to work on this. The curator that came with Ollie and saw something, I thought, I've just begun this. And I said, no, I can't do that. And I said, how about showing some other pieces that haven't been seen in Europe? There's something that's just been in the Whitney Biennial. And Holly said, no, we want this new piece. And so she came over and with a bottle of wine. And anyway, I said, okay, here's the deal. An artwork decides when it's done. I don't decide. I notice it, I recognize it, but an artwork takes as long as it needs to take. And that's when she said, quit your job. I'll send all the people down to work. And so I said, okay, we can do that. I'll quit my job, send the people, but if it's not ready to go, it's not going to go. But then, of course, I wanted it to go. And I had all those people working. So it did work out. But there was another time when I was working on Deep Station, and it was shown at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And around the same time, I was invited to make a new piece and show at the Brooklyn Museum. And they had money from the National Endowment or something like that. But somehow the money it got mishandled somehow. I don't know, but it wasn't there. It wasn't there. I was already working on a new piece that I was excited about. And then they said, well, we don't have money. Can you just carry on by yourself? And I said, no, I can't do that. And they said, then we'll have to cancel the show. And I thought, no. And I thought really hard one night, and I thought, Deep Station is up at University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Nobody's seen it in New York. It would look great in the lobby. So I'm going to propose we do that instead. And I didn't know if they'd agree, but they did agree. So that wasn't perfect, but it did work out. But there's one piece one thing I learned from the poet Ted Berrigan, who I think of as my mentor. He said, finish everything you start. And I won't go into all reasons why that's such an important thing to do. But I do have that one piece that was about New York rooftops and never got finished. I'd say I was about a third of the way through making it, but that's the only time.
Interesting. And you never felt compelled to just go and do it at a later date, just finish it yourself?
No, I guess I just had moved on,
Yeah, I hear ya.
and I did some other pieces. Yeah.
If you look back now, is there a moment that still feels significant, even if at the time it didn't look like or didn't feel like success?
I don't know. I mean, I think about looking back now, I can see when I was taking tiny steps towards installation when I was doing the 7 by 10, making that little plastic box that went out on the floor. But after I made those, I got really lost again for a while and did other things. But I was later able to see that those were steps. I was kept on moving in the same direction, but I had side trips where I got very discouraged. And at one point, after I'd made those, which I can see now were steps toward getting out on the floor and making installations, I I went through a period of 6 months or something where I thought, I need to learn how to draw. I should paint. I should. And then somehow that came back, that moving toward what became installation. But I also think that in my journals, which journal writing is totally important to the way I work, it's the way I think, the way I figure things out. And going through and typing up my journals, I discovered as I did that there would be an idea that I thought I would get an idea and I'd write it in my journal, and then time would go on. And then I'd get it again, but I was thinking the second time I thought, oh, that's the first. I've never thought of this before. It was just like there's some things that just insist that they need to happen. I do see myself sort of as a vehicle. So they're just some things that they want me to make them, and they don't go away. They keep coming back until I pay attention.
Hmm. You mentioned something interesting about how you don't like using the word practice about artists' work. Tell me about why is that?
Well, we never used it or needed it before. It was like my art or what's going on in my studio or what I'm working on now, just my art. And then I hated it as soon as I noticed it. And then it became so much everywhere. Um, I mean, I think of my art as more like a mission. Practice doesn't describe it. And I'm serving something larger and all that kind of stuff. And a friend of mine, she was working on a book, somebody my age, somebody's been a friend for a long time. And I had really big piece going on in my new studio up here in the country. And she brought her brothers over, and they're not art people except that they have a sister who's an artist. And so this great big thing, video component, and I guess they were really impressed. But afterwards, they said to her, like, "Does she sell those things?" And Cynthia said, "No." And then they said, "Why does somebody do that?" Like they just couldn't understand. And Cynthia and I had arguments about the use of practice because she was going to have it in her book all over the place. And I said, I just don't like that word. And she didn't seem to understand what I was. But after she told me what her brother said, I said, there it is. If you hadn't used the word practice, it's something else. Practice doesn't describe. Her brothers might not have been so baffled. But I don't know. Anyway. And so
Very
she
interesting.
went through the text of her book and took practice out every place that it could.
Ah, okay. Did she replace it with the word mission?
No, I don't know what she replaced it with.
I like that idea. I think I might start using that.
Just artwork. What do you do? I'm an artist. What do you do? I make my art. Now, it doesn't need
Mhm.
this. That came in from somewhere else. And I know Peter Sheldup, very big critic in this country, and he was a classmate of mine at Carleton. He died about 4 years ago. Somebody told me recently that he had hated that word too. And I would say he, in some ways, was the most preeminent art critic in this country in his poem. He wrote for the New Yorker. So that was interesting. I thought, okay, well,
Great minds think alike.
nobody ever needed that word before. It just came in somewhere. But I don't think from art or artists originally, probably theorists.
How would you say the art world has changed compared to when you were starting out?
It's changed enormously. And I saw and was part of one of the biggest changes was, women getting chances to show. But as I think what people say, okay, so women are getting a chance to show. They're showing more. People know more about their work. There are more women artists, but they're still not collected to the same degree that men are at all. Like the Guerrilla Girls, a group some of whom I know. I could have been a Guerrilla Girl. You know the Guerrilla Girls?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
I could have been one.
So you're mates with them. You could have been one of them.
Yeah, I was at the meeting where it was being formed, but I was doing my political work, the whole law stuff, trying to stay in my law because I thought, well, I can't do both. But they became terrific. There was always one, she always wore black and yellow striped socks. So I always, if I'd see her in a gorilla mask, I always knew who it was. But yeah, terribly clever and smart and funny. And the idea that for the same amount of money, you could buy maybe one de Kooning sketch or 50 works by every really prominent woman artist you could think of at the time. So in New York, the art world was really small when I first got there compared to what it was. And it wasn't international. And that was the very beginning. And that was before I started to show. So there was the women thing. That was a really big change I saw. And co-op galleries like AIR beginning, artists taking things in their own hands. I saw SoHo go from nothing to big art center and then become no longer. And now it's like Gucci stores and stuff like that. And then along the way, all this international, you know, things starting to happen. And so it went from, in New York anyway, from a small, almost intimate world and a world that was mixed with artists, with poets or maybe musicians. I guess that still goes on in many ways, but it seems vastly different.
Yeah, it's pretty wild reading the stories of when people used to go to parties in New York and everybody knows everyone and everyone hangs out in the same place. It's like, wow. It's very it's not the same
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah. But then, so there was that, and then the women were also excluded from when it was like that.
Yeah.
So maybe women enlarged it, but that was a good thing.
What advice would you have for an artist who is just starting out today with installation work?
It's really hard to say because it just developed for me. I didn't even call it that. So to start out, I don't know quite how somebody starts out now with that big spaces. That big studio spaces just aren't available in New York anymore.
Nope, in Sydney either.
No, and it seems to me that something happens that isn't good, which is if you don't have a big space to work in, you can't work through. I mean, Judy Facts talked about working through the work. What I described before. You try this, you try that, you look at it for a while, you come back to it, you develop it more, you get some new ideas, but it's something that evolves organically and over time. And if all you have is like a shoebox of a studio, all you can do is like a sketch, and then you get to the big space. But the best you can do is something that's half baked because you haven't had it or oversimplified or not rich. So I don't know what I would say that starting out, she needs space, I think. I mean, there's outdoor installation too, I guess, public art. But where you get to work through your ideas, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very expensive nowadays.
Yeah, I think space is really important. And I guess I'd also say, I mean, this has been a one-way conversation. I haven't heard you talk about your work, but I would say to just decide you're going to do installation art and think about why you want to do that. If you've been inspired by things you've seen and it feels to you like the only way you can do what your heart wants to have you do. But if installation art is like an idea, it's like, oh, I think I'll do installation art, but I could do painting. I would say stay away from installation art because it's too difficult without space. One thing, I need space.
Yep.
Although when I taught, and this wasn't original with me, I had seen, I can't remember what gallery in New York, but there is somebody now named Lothar Osterberg who can do bigger installations, but he does a lot of things where you're looking through a lens into a space behind the wall, and they're miniature installations, and they're wonderful.
Okay.
It's different. I mean, it's very different, but is one could take one's ideas.
Is there a dream project you haven't been able to make yet? If you could do anything wherever, no limitations?
Um, in 2018, I made a piece where I built, it was like a dock on Lake Superior looking at a distant ship and the light changing. And I used video for the first time, like from a painting I'd done, but a video of a ship on the horizon and then the light changing so that I needed time. I needed video. And it was more like a big diorama. And that's more the way I'm working now. And I've made diorama boxes about the house I have here. It's a main character, but now there's another house. I've got almost 8 dioramas now. They're what I did to get used to where I was and where I was living out of the city. And I've done so much stuff with infrastructure, and now I was looking at trees. And I did a video at night the first summer I was here, and I turned around and my house came like just swimming into view. And this is another idea I thought was new when I thought of it then, but I actually tried to make a public artwork that didn't work out where I had a house floating around. Anyway, I want to have a house floating through the trees, something like that.
Well, you did have houses floating on water
Yeah.
once.
So floating houses. I guess I want to make
More.
floating through the tree more. Yeah. This would be more ghostly.
And are you working on anything now?
I'm just finishing up a couple of diorama boxes. And I was going to be doing a Times Square piece that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, tell us more about that.
It was scheduled for fall of 2026, but now it's been scheduled for fall of 2027. So I still work on that. And I think I'm going to make a mock up in my studio. I can't make it as tall as it would be, but I think I'm just push ahead with that and get the mock up done. It'll be fabricated by somebody else, but it's metal and I don't really work in metal. But anyway, that just changed. So I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe I'll do the Times Square thing as far as I can get it as a mock-up and ready to be fabricated. Take it down, put it in storage, and try this floating house.
Mm-hmm. So that's going to be larger than your usual pretty large scale?
The outdoor piece?
Yeah.
No, it'll be my scale. And on the ground, the footprint won't be much. It'll be about the same as my recent, last 20 years, 30 years, really large pieces, like 27 by 20 or something like that, footprint. But they said for it to be presence, it really needed to go up to 18, 19, 20 feet. And I've always worked with 12 ceilings, so that'll be different.
And was that going to coincide with an exhibition in a gallery?
Yeah, and I haven't talked with the gallery, so I'm not sure how that's all going to develop.
So where can people keep an eye on it, find out more, see more of your work?
Well, there's an early piece up in Columbia Art Museum in Georgia. But, I do have a website that I think is pretty good, and there's a way to communicate with me, and I do send out newsletters from time to time. There's a way to get on my newsletter list through the website, donnadennisart.com. So you just Google me and it should take the day.
Mm-hmm. Do you use social media as well?
When the monograph was being worked on 3 or 4 years ago, the publicist with the publisher, which was Monticello Press, said, "You got to do Instagram." So I started to do it. I slacked off now, but yeah, I do it not very often anymore. But I look at it.
Well, I'll put the links to your website and your Instagram in the show notes so people can find you and follow you. And yeah, there's a lot of information on the website. It's very thorough.
Yeah. I'll just add that the Instagram, I would announce shows and things like that. If somebody follows regularly on Instagram. But the best thing would be to sign up for the newsletter.
Well, I appreciate your stories. It's very interesting to get your unique perspective. I really enjoyed reading the journals. It's like a peek inside an artist's mind. I find that fascinating. I didn't manage to read all of it, but I'll definitely
I'll
go back
say
to.
my niece, who's a film editor, I found out she'd only read the first half. And I said, "That's when I was struggling. That's when nothing was working out. You got to read to the end. And the end, I'm in the Venice Biennale." So, but yeah, I'll say there are these two books too. There's Writing Toward Dawn, Journals 1969 to 1982, which is my excerpts from my journals, but chronologically, so you get the story of how things were happening for me. And that's available through Amazon, published by Bamboo Group Books, which is an interesting poetry publisher. And then Monticello Press did a big, beautiful monograph, Poet in Three Dimensions. They're both available on Amazon, and probably the best way to get them.
Yeah, I will put links to those as well so people can just easily find it if they want to. I think they're, yeah, a great resource.
And I'll say about the journal, speaking of a resource, the journal, as I was writing them myself to try to understand what I was doing. But I did have in the back of my mind, I thought maybe this would be helpful to some young woman artist, or people tell me any artist. When it was edited, I tried to leave it as much as I could in. I remember reading Anais Nin and being annoyed that she never talked in her journals about how she got her money, and money was all
Hmm.
so I tried to make it be, it was real. It was about boyfriends. It was about money. It was about job. It was about my studio, my art, what I was reading, what I was listening to, like everything as much as I could.
Yeah, no, it's really engrossing. I found like you can't stop reading because it's like, what's gonna happen next?
And then I
Almost.
was
How is she gonna how is she gonna feel about this piece next?
always,
Yeah, it inspired me to maybe I should go back to journaling.
and about journaling, I would just say, I don't write every day. It's not a diary. I just, when I need to, when there's something I'm
Hmm.
about or something amazing or troubling happened and I want to record it. It is mostly about figuring things out in my personal life, in my art, job wise. And I think one thing I really wanted to do was, as a young woman artist, I hated the way so many male artists seem to be mythified. I wanted to demythify what it was to be an artist.
Yeah, I think that's the best part of it. And it really does that well. Like you get a glimpse into the behind the scenes thoughts and struggles and triumphs and like that you one day you were like, I should have a jazz band at my opening. And then you did that. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
Oh, I'd love to do something really special for your opening. I don't think she ever imagined I was going to come up with the idea of a jazz band, early jazz.
Sounds great. Yeah. And there was dancing from photos.
Yeah, with Rackstraw Downs. Who also supplied the title for the monograph, because he gave me a drawing once and he said, "For Donna, Poet in Three Dimensions." And I told the editor, she said, "That's it. That's the title."
Yeah, it's beautiful. Okay, Donna. Well, it's getting late where you are. I won't hold you anymore, but thank you so much for taking the time.
Pleasure.
It's been a real
Thank you
pleasure.
for the invitation and for the experience itself. Thanks.
That was Donna Dennis, based in Germantown, New York. You can find out more about her work on her website, donnadennisart.com, which has a wealth of information and where you can subscribe to her newsletter. And you can also follow her on Instagram at Donna Dennis Studio. For fellow artists, I also highly recommend getting your hands on Writing Toward Dawn, a volume of selected journals that give insight into Donna's life, career, and process. There are many very relatable stories and some wild ones. The book is available to order on Amazon or via Bamberger Books. Links to those, as well as everyone mentioned in this episode, are in the show notes and on our website, installationartpodcast.com. If you've been enjoying this podcast and want to support it, I would be very grateful if you'd consider buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/installationartpodcast. It helps keep this independent project going and allows me to continue bringing you these conversations with important guests. Link is in the show notes. Thank you for listening and for supporting, and until next time.